Picture the 1980s. Synths everywhere, big hair, and one-band sound glued to every radio. The Human League gave us Don't You Want Me, a track that sold millions and still pops up in movies and playlists today. They didn't just ride the wave, they helped create it. Yet somehow, after dominating the charts, they faded from the headlines without a single train wreck scandal. No arrests, no public feuds, no dramatic collapse. Just smart pivots, tough breaks, and a few decisions that almost changed everything. We're going to walk through how three guys from Sheffield built an empire, lost half of it overnight, rebuilt with two teenagers they met in a club, and kept going for decades. Along the way, we'll hit the close calls, the money scares, and the quiet moments they've only started talking about in the last couple of years. Ready? Let's start at the very beginning, in a city far from the glamour.
Back in 1977, Sheffield was a steel town on its knees. Factories closing, smokestacks silent, and three young guys with no musical training decided to build the future in a rented room above a butcher shop. Philip Oakey worked as a hospital porter, pushing trolleys between wards. Martin Ware soldered circuit boards in a factory. Ian Craig Marsh studied computer programming by day and tinkered with synthesizers by night. None of them could play guitar, none of them wanted to. They'd seen the Sex Pistols tear through town the year before, but punk's raw howl didn't speak to them. Instead, they locked themselves away with second-hand Korgs, tape machines, and a shared obsession: Kraftwerk, Brian Eno, and the cold throb of machines that sounded like tomorrow. They called themselves the Future at first, then the Human League, lifted from a 1970s sci-fi board game where players engineered humanity's next step. Their early gigs were chaos: no drummer, no bass player, just two guys hunched over keyboards while Oakey half-sang, half-spoke lyrics about cloning and dystopia. Audiences either walked out or stood frozen, unsure if they were watching performance art or a prank. One night in Leeds, the power cut out mid-song. The trio kept playing unplugged, fingers sliding over silent keys while the crowd laughed. They pressed on anyway. By 1978, they'd scraped enough cash to record a demo. A tiny Scottish label called Fast Product, run by a guy who mailed 7-inch singles in brown paper bags, took a chance. Their first single, Being Boiled, landed like a transmission from another planet. Monotone vocals, clattering percussion, lyrics about silk farms in Asia. Ignore Radio ignored it. John Peel played it twice in 1 week. Suddenly, London A&R men were driving north on the M1, chasing the rumor of a band that sounded like nothing else. Virgin Records signed them in 1979. The debut album, Reproduction, came out that September. 9 tracks of icy minimalism, no choruses, no love songs. Critics called it brave. Sales barely cracked 5 figures. The follow-up, Travelogue, arrived 8 months later and edged closer to melody, but still leaned hard into the weird. One song, Dreams of Leaving, stretched 9 minutes with a single lyric repeated like a broken loop. Fans mailed them cassette tapes of factory noises to sample. The band loved it. Behind the scenes, the chemistry was fraying. Ware and Marsh wanted total control, every note, every sleeve design. Oakey, now the frontman by default, started pushing for catchier hooks. Their manager, Bob Last, saw pound signs in the distance and began nudging them toward the mainstream. Rehearsals turned into arguments over tempo and image. Oakey grew his hair into an asymmetric curtain. Ware wore thrift store suits like a banker from the future. The press ate up the contrast, but inside the rehearsal room, the air was thick with unspoken resentment. They toured Europe, opening for Iggy Pop and Susie and the Banshees, crowds who wanted chaos, not circuit boards. In Hamburg, someone threw a beer bottle that shattered inches from Marsh's keyboard. In Brussels, the promoter refused to pay because there's no drummer. The band laughed it off on stage, but the cracks were spreading. By the summer of 1980, they were headlining small clubs to half-empty rooms, still in debt to Virgin, still convinced the next album would break them wide open. What nobody saw coming was the night everything snapped in half. Two founding members walked out, taking their sound and half the band's identity with them. Oakey stood alone with a name, a contract, and a tour bus due to leave in 6 weeks. The Human League as the world knew it was finished before it had even peaked. But that collapse set the stage for the wildest reinvention in synth-pop history. October 1980. The Human League had just played a small club in Ballion in Birmingham, the kind of venue where the walls sweat and the PA crackles like a dying radio. Backstage, the mood was grim. Virgin Records had advanced them another £10,000 to start album number 3, but the money was already gone. Studio rent, equipment repairs, and a string of cancelled gigs. Philip Oakey sat on a flight case, unlacing his boots, while Martin Ware and Ian Craig Marsh counted the night's door take. £243. Enough for petrol and chips, nothing more. The tension had been building for months. Ware and Marsh wanted to double down on the experimental edge, longer tracks, darker themes, maybe even a concept album about urban decay. Oakey heard the same demos and pictured radio play, Top of the Pops, something that could lift them out of the red. Manager Bob Last kept pushing the pop angle, dangling promises of bigger budgets if they just meet the label halfway. Every rehearsal ended the same way. Ware slamming a synth lid, Marsh staring at the floor, Oakey pacing with a cigarette burning down to the filter. The breaking point came over a single song. They'd been working on a track called Dance Vision, a 7-minute instrumental built on a looping bass pulse. Ware loved it. He saw it as the future of club music. Oakey thought it was wallpaper. During one session, Last walked in, listened for 30 seconds, and said, "Cut it to 3 minutes, add a vocal, and we've got a single." Ware told him to leave. Last reminded them who paid the bills. The argument spilled into the corridor, voices echoing off concrete. Oakey tried to mediate, but Ware turned on him. "You're selling out before we've even sold anything." 2 days later, Ware and Marsh met with Last in a Sheffield pub. They laid out their terms: full creative control, a new production deal under their own banner, and a clean split from Oakey. Last saw opportunity. He'd been managing both acts in his head for weeks. By midnight, the paperwork was sketched on a beer mat. Ware and Marsh would form a new outfit, later named Heaven 17, and take the gear they'd bought with Human League advances. Oakey would keep the name, the Virgin contract, and the debt. Oakey found out the next morning when the rehearsal room door was locked. A note taped to the glass read, "Keys with Bob, new project starts Monday." Inside, the synths were gone, the tape reels missing, even the ashtrays emptied. He stood there in his hospital porter coat, still smelling of disinfectant from the night shift, and realized he had 6 weeks until a European tour, with no band, no songs, and a record label expecting a hit album. He drove straight to Virgin's offices in London. The A&R man, Simon Draper, laid it out plain: deliver a commercial record or the deal was dead. Oakey asked for a week to think. That night, he sat in a Notting Hill bedsit, staring at a tour itinerary that now looked like a suicide note. He considered quitting, maybe going back to the hospital, letting the name die quietly. Then he remembered the contract. If he defaulted, Virgin could sue him personally. The debt would follow him for years. Desperation sharpened his focus. He called the only person he trusted, his friend Philip Adrian Wright, the slide projector guy who'd been handling visuals since the early days. Wright had no interest in fame, but he knew the scene. Over pints, they mapped a survival plan. Keep the name, honor the tour, find new members fast. No auditions, no ads, too slow. They needed bodies who could learn quick and wouldn't flake. Oakey started hitting the clubs every night, notebook in pocket, watching dancers, listening for voices that cut through the noise. He wasn't looking for musicians, he was looking for presence. Meanwhile, Ware and Marsh were already in the studio, laying down tracks for what would become Heaven 17's Penthouse and Pavement. The split was clean on paper, but the resentment simmered. Ware told NME the Human League had been a committee with no direction.
Oakey read it on the train back north and tore the page out. The tour bus was booked for November 9th. Oakey had 24 days to rebuild a band from scratch. What he did next wasn't just bold, it rewrote the rules of pop stardom. 2 teenage girls, 0 experience, 1 impulsive decision in a Sheffield nightclub. That single night turned a funeral into a phoenix moment.
October 1980, Sheffield's Crazy Daisy nightclub. Philip Oakey was nursing a pint, scanning the crowd through cigarette haze. He wasn't there to dance, he was hunting for a lifeline. The Human League was a name with no band, a tour looming, and a Virgin Records deadline breathing down his neck. His mate, Philip Adrian Wright, sat beside him, pointing out faces in the strobe-lit chaos. They needed something raw, something that could sell the band's new direction without months of rehearsal. Time was the enemy, 3 weeks until the tour bus rolled out. The dance floor pulsed with kids barely out of school, moving to Blondie and Bowie. Oakey's eyes landed on 2 girls in the center, maybe 18, all energy and instinct. Joanne Catherall and Susan Sulley weren't performers. They were A-level students who'd snuck out on a school night, giggling in thrift store dresses. They moved like they owned the place, unpolished, magnetic, no hint of stage fright. Oakey leaned over to Wright. Them. They're it. Wright laughed, thinking it was a joke. Oakey was dead serious. He approached them as the DJ spun Life on Mars. No pitch, no preamble. Ever thought about singing in a band? Joanne laughed, assuming he was drunk. Susan asked if he was scouting for a talent show. Oakey explained he had a tour in 21 days, a record deal on the line, and no singers. They weren't musicians, but they had something better. Vibe. He offered them a rehearsal the next day. No strings, just a chance to try. They shrugged and said yes, mostly because it sounded like a story to tell their mates. The next morning, October 21st, they met in a damp Sheffield basement. Joanne and Susan showed up in school uniforms, still skeptical. Oakey handed them lyric sheets for a track he'd been sketching, something called Don't You Want Me. He'd written it in one night, inspired by a teen romance comic he'd found in a newsagent's bin. A he said, she said duet about love and power. The girls read the words, swapped lines, and started singing. Their voices were untrained but sharp, cutting through the cheap reverb of a Roland synth. Wright fiddled with a slide projector in the corner, grinning. Oakey knew he'd found gold. They rehearsed for 10 days straight, 6 hours at a time. Joanne's alto was warm, almost mournful. Susan's higher pitch carried a defiant edge. Neither could read music, but they learned fast, mimicking Oakey's phrasing until it clicked. Virgin sent a producer, Martin Russian, to check progress. He expected a disaster. Instead, he heard the bones of a hit. Russian brought in a new synth rig and a Linn drum machine, turning their basement jams into something sleek. By November, the girls were on a tour bus to Amsterdam, passports still warm from the printer, singing to baffled punk crowds who didn't know what to make of 2 teenagers backing a guy with a lopsided haircut. Back home, Dare was taking shape. Russian and Oakey spent nights in monumental studios, layering the girls' vocals over pulsing bass lines. Don't You Want Me became the anchor, its call-and-response hook built for radio. The album dropped in October 1981, just as the tour wrapped. It sold 1 million copies in 6 months, hitting #1 in the UK and cracking the US top 10. The video, Joanne and Susan playing star-crossed levers opposite Oakey's brooding waiter, played non-stop on a new channel called MTV. Whispers started almost immediately. Fans on the early internet, like CompuServe forums, speculated about off-stage drama. Was Oakey sweet on Susan? Were the girls secretly running the show? None of it was true, but the rumors fueled the band's mystique. Joanne and Susan, barely 19, handled it with a shrug, more focused on passing their A-levels than reading gossip. Oakey leaned into the chaos, wearing lipstick on stage and dodging questions about his love life. The gamble paid off, but the spotlight brought new pressures. Dare was a monster, but Virgin wanted more, faster. The band was now a 5-piece. Oakey, the girls, Wright on visuals, and new recruit Ian Burden on keys. But they were still figuring out who they were. The world saw pop stars.
They saw a hospital porter, 2 students, and a guy who loved slides, trying not to crack under the weight of sudden fame. And just when they thought they'd hit the peak, the next challenge was already waiting, one that would push them to chase a sound they didn't fully understand.
October 1981. Dare lands in record shops, and the Human League are suddenly everywhere. Don't You Want Me climbs to #1 in the UK for 5 weeks, then storms America, peaking at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July 1982. The album shifts 3 million copies worldwide in 18 months. Virgin Records throws a party at a London hotel. Philip Oakey shows up in a thrift store suit, Joanne Catherall and Sulley still wearing the same boots they danced in at the Crazy Daisy. Nobody can believe the turnaround. 12 months earlier, Oakey was staring at an empty rehearsal room and a stack of unpaid bills. The tour buses get bigger. They headline the Futurama Festival in Leeds to 10,000 people who know every word. MTV loops the Don't You Want Me video, shot on 35mm film for the price of a used car, until it becomes the channel's most requested clip. Oakey's asymmetric haircut spawns copycats in every sixth form common room. The girls, now 20, field fan mail by the sack. Marriage proposals, Polaroids, cassette tapes of bedroom covers. They answer what they can between sound checks, still catching up on missed coursework by post. Behind the gloss, the machine is running hot. Martin Rushent books Genetic Studios in Reading for the follow-up, but Virgin wants it yesterday. The label advances another £100,000, most of it earmarked for studio time and a push into the American market. Oakey writes on planes, in hotel bathrooms, on the back of set lists. The band records at night, sleeps on the studio floor, weeks to Rushent tweaking drum sounds. They cut Love Action and Open Your Heart in single takes. The girls nail harmonies while eating cold pizza. Rushent's Lynn drum machine becomes the heartbeat of every track. Money starts rolling in, but not as fast as it goes out. Tour costs eat half the royalties. Lighting rigs, backing tapes, a crew of 12. Oakey buys a small house in Sheffield for cash, the first time he's ever owned anything. Joanne and Susan bank their earnings, still living with their parents. The press calls them the schoolgirls who conquered pop, which rankles. They're professionals now, even if their passports say otherwise. Then the cracks appear. American radio wants more of the same. British critics want them to evolve. Oakey fields calls from Los Angeles managers promising stadium tours if they'll just add a live drummer. He refuses. Machines are the point. Virgin schedules a U.S. promo swing, 6 cities in 8 days. Morning zoo radio, mall signings, a spot on Solid Gold. The jet lag is brutal. In Dallas, Susan loses her voice mid-interview. Joanne covers by telling the host about Sheffield fish and chips. Backstage, Oakey stares at a contract writer that now includes Perrier and Fresh Lilies. He wonders aloud if this is still the band that started above a butcher shop. The pressure peaks during mixing for Fascination, a 6-track mini-album rushed out in 1983 to keep the U.S. market warm. Rushent and Oakey argue over a snare sound for 48 hours straight. The engineer falls asleep at the console. When the record ships, it sells respectably, but feels like a holding pattern. Critics sniff that the League are treading water. Oakey reads the reviews on a flight to Tokyo and stuffs the newspaper into the seat pocket. Personal lives start fraying. Oakey's relationship with a London model collapses under the distance. Joanne's boyfriend back home can't handle the tabloid photos. Susan discovers a fan has been sleeping outside her parents' house. They hire security for the first time. On stage, the smiles stay fixed, but off it, the 5 of them barely speak. Philip Adrian Wright, the quiet visual guy, starts bringing a Super 8 camera to document the madness. The footage will surface decades later in a documentary no one asked for. By 1984, the band is exhausted but committed. They hole up in a countryside studio to craft Hysteria, determined to prove Dare wasn't a fluke. Oakey writes 30 songs, only 10 make the cut. The girls push for more lead vocals. Rushent quits halfway, citing creative differences. The album ships in May, sells 1 million, spawns 3 top 20 singles, but never feels like victory. Oakey tells Smash Hits it's the sound of 5 people trying not to drown. The world sees synth pop royalty. They see a band one misstep from collapse, and the next misstep is already booked.
A transatlantic flight to Minneapolis, a pair of American producers with a very different playbook, and a decision that will split fans down the middle.
January 1985. The Human League step off a red-eye into Minneapolis snow, bleary-eyed and clutching demo tapes. Virgin Records has brokered a deal with Flight Time Productions, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the hottest hitmakers in R&B, fresh off Janet Jackson's Control. The brief is blunt. Make an album that cracks black radio, keeps the synths, loses the Sheffield chill. Oakey signs the contract in a hotel lobby without reading the fine print. Joanne and Susan, now 23, swap club dresses for parkas and wonder if they've flown into a different century. Jam and Lewis work out of a converted warehouse, walls lined with gold records and a Fairlight sampler the size of a fridge. The first day is culture shock. In Sheffield, they built tracks layer by layer, arguing over every 16th note. Here, the Americans lay down a drum loop, nod once, and say, "That's the pocket." Oakey's demos, moody, minor key sketches, are politely shelved. Jam hands him a new song, Human, built on a gospel chord progression and a bass line that slaps like Prince. Oakey records the vocal in 2 takes, no overdubs. The Bretts stare at each other. Is this still them? The girls thrive. Jam writes Susan a lead line that soars. Susan layers harmonies like she's been in church choirs her whole life. They cut I Need Your Loving in an afternoon, giggling when Lewis adds a cowbell for flavor. Back home, their old fans would call it sacrilege. Here, it feels like freedom. Between sessions, they ate fried chicken from a bucket and watched Soul Train on a tiny TV. Oakey buys a secondhand leather jacket and starts saying y'all without irony. Money flows like tap water. Virgin wires another $200,000. The studio books Prince's engineer for mixing. A stylist flies in from Los Angeles with shoulder pads the size of satellite dishes. The band films a video for Human on a soundstage dressed like a futuristic diner. Oakey in a white suit, the girls in neon lame. MTV premieres it in heavy rotation. The single hits #1 in the US R&B chart, #8 pop. For the first time, black radio stations in Chicago and Atlanta play a Human League song between Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. Then the backlash begins. UK critics savage the album before it's finished. Melody Maker runs a headline, "Sheffield sells soul." Fans flood the band's P.O. box with letters, "Where are the synths?" Oakey defends the shift in interviews, claiming evolution, but privately, he's rattled. He calls Martin Ware, now a successful producer, for advice. Ware laughs and says, "Welcome to the game." The conversation ends in silence. Crash drops in September 1986. It sells 1 million worldwide, spawns 2 more US top 30 hits, but stalls at #24 in the UK. The tour is half empty in Manchester, full houses in Detroit. Oakey stands on stage in a sequin jacket, singing to crowds who only know the new stuff. Backstage, he counts the house, 4,000 seats, 2,300 filled. The promoter shrugs. R&B crowd doesn't travel north. Personal costs mount. Joanne's mother falls ill. She flies home mid-tour, misses 3 shows. Susan starts dating a Minneapolis session guitarist who follows the bus to the next city. Oakey's leather jacket gets stolen in a Chicago hotel. The band's accountant sends a fax. Royalties are healthy, but advances must be repaid. They owe Virgin another album by 1988, where the debt compounds. One night in a St. Paul diner, Oakey confesses to the girls he almost sang the same for the Never-Ending Story. Giorgio Moroder had called in 1984, needed a baritone for the title track. Oakey recorded a guide vocal, but Moroder chose Limahl instead. The demo still sits in a vault somewhere. Imagine, Oakey says, stirring cold coffee. 1 phone call, and we're the soundtrack to every kid's childhood. Joanne laughs. Susan doesn't. She's starting to wonder if every choice is a fork they can't uncross. By Christmas 1986, Jam and Lewis are gone, off to work with New Edition. The Human League fly home with master tapes and a suitcase of sequins. Virgin wants a greatest hits package to cash in.
Oakey wants to disappear. The band holes up in a cottage outside Sheffield. No phones, no press. They listen to Crash on a battered ghetto blaster and argue for 3 days. Is it brilliant or a betrayal? They settle on both and crack open warm beer. The American dream delivered hits, but it fractured the identity they'd fought to build. The next chapter would be quieter, darker, and far more expensive than any transatlantic flight. Bailiffs at the door, albums locked in vaults, and a decade where the charts forgot their name, but never quite let them go. January 1987. The Human League land at Heathrow with suntans, sequined stage clothes, and a gnawing certainty that the ride has crested. Crash is still on American radio, but the UK charts have moved on. Stock Aitken Waterman rules the airwaves with squeaky clean pop, and synths suddenly sound dated. Virgin Records greets them with a new contract. One more album by 1989, or the outstanding advances, now pushing £500,000, convert to personal debt. Philip Oakey signs on the tarmac, snowflakes melting on the ink. They were at a farmhouse studio near Sheffield, determined to reclaim their sound. No American producers, no guest stars, just 5 people, a fairlight, and a stack of blank tapes. Oakey writes at night, chain-smoking by an open fire. The girls, now 25, push for equal songwriting credits. They've earned it. Ian Burden and new keyboardist Neil Sutton layer textures that nod to Dare, but feel heavier, almost industrial. They title the project Romantic, half joke, half plea. Sessions drag, money burns. The farmhouse landlord raises rent, the band pays in cash scraped from tour merch. Virgin sends a junior A&R every month to check progress. Each visit ends the same. Where's the single? Oakey plays them a 9-minute track about urban alienation. The rep smiles politely and catches the next train south. By 1989, they're desperate for a spark. They hire William Orbit, hot off remixing Kraftwerk and Madonna, to polish the mixes. Orbit arrives with a portable Atari and a reputation for genius. For 6 weeks, the farmhouse hums. New beats, chopped vocals, ideas flying. Then Orbit vanishes. No warning, no goodbye. The band drives to London, finds his flat empty, phone disconnected. The master tapes, finished mixes of half the album, are locked in his private studio. Virgin lawyers send letters. Orbit's manager claims creative differences and refuses access. Months pass. The album stalls. Oakey's personal finances collapse. Royalties from Crash cover crew salaries, but not the farmhouse or the London flat he bought at the peak. Bailiffs knock in March 1990, seizing furniture while he's in the shower. He hides in the bathroom, towel around his waist, listening to them inventory his life. 1 sofa, 2 lamps, a gold record for Human. The girls fare better. Prudent savings, no debt. But the mood sours. Susan considers university. Joanne auditions for a musical. Oakey begs Virgin for one more advance. They agree, on condition the album ships by August. Orbit finally surfaces in July. Courier delivers a DAT tape labeled HL Roughs. The mixes are brilliant, but incomplete. Some songs cut off mid-chorus, others drenched in reverb that swallows the vocals. The band spends 3 sleepless weeks in a cheap London studio patching holes. Romantic limps out in October 1990. It peaks at number 24, sells 90,000 copies, and vanishes. Critics call it a noble failure. Oakey calls it the sound of 5 people drowning in their own history. The tour is a ghost run. Half-filled clubs, promoters canceling at the last minute. In Birmingham, only 400 tickets sell. The venue curtains off the upper tier. Backstage, Oakey finds a fax from Virgin. The label is dropping them unless the next record ships within 12 months. He tears it up, but the message sticks. Personal lives unravel quietly. Oakey sells the London flat at a loss, moves into a rented terrace in Sheffield. The girls take day jobs, Joanne in a record shop, Susan training as a teacher. Philip Adrian Wright quits music entirely, opens a photography studio. Burden and Sutton session for local acts, anything to pay bills. The Human League becomes a weekend hobby. Occasional radio sessions, one-off festivals where they play the old hits to polite applause. In 1993, they signed to East West, a smaller label hungry for catalog acts. The advance is modest, £50,000, but it's oxygen. They record Octopus in a converted chapel, self-produced, no frills. The lead single, Tell Me When, surprises everyone. Number 6 in the UK, their first top 10 in 9 years. The album sells 200,000, buys them another year. They tour Europe in a hired van, sleeping in travel lodges, laughing at how far they've fallen and how good it feels to play again. By 1996, the spark fades. East-West merges, new bosses want dance remixes. The band refuses. Contract ends. Silence. Oakey takes a job lecturing at Sheffield Hallam University on music technology. Ironic, given he still can't read sheet music. The girls settle into family life. For 5 years, the Human League exists only on compilation CDs and 80s revival nights. The phone rings in 2000. A tiny dance label, Papillon, offers a one-album deal. No advance, but full ownership. They accept. Secrets records in Oakey's garage, funded by credit cards. Critics praise the return to form. Sales barely crack 20,000. The label folds 6 months later. The master tapes end up in a lockup outside Doncaster. The 90s stripped them from everything, except the name and the songs. They learned to live small, to measure success in hundreds instead of millions. But the story wasn't over. A new century brought streaming, nostalgia tours, and a fresh generation discovering Don't You Want Me in movies and memes. The quiet years forged a resilience no chart could measure and set the stage for a comeback nobody saw coming.
June 2001. A lock-up garage on an industrial estate outside Doncaster smells of oil and old carpet. Philip Oakey, Joanne Catherall, and Susan Sulley stand around a battered 8-track recorder, listening to the final mix of Secrets. The tiny Papillon label has already folded, but the album is done. 20 tracks of sleek, melancholy electro-pop recorded in living rooms and spare bedrooms. They press 5,000 CDs themselves, stuff them into cardboard sleeves, and sell them from a folding table at the Sheffield lead mill. A kid in a hoodie buys one, asks for a selfie, posts it to a forum called ILXOR. Within weeks, the album's traded on Napster, then iTunes. The Human League are back, sort of, and the internet is their new Virgin Records. The first proper gig in years is a 2002 nostalgia package at Butlins. They share a bill with ABC and Heaven 17, Martin Ware's band, now on cordial terms. Oakey and Ware share a pint backstage, no grudges, just 2 blokes in their 40s laughing about the time they argued over a snare sound for 6 hours. The crowd is mostly 30-somethings who grew up with Dare on their parents' car stereos. They scream every word. Oakey forgets the second verse of Love Action, improvises, nobody cares. The girls nail the high notes like they're still 19. The reviews call it a victory lap. The band calls it rent money. Streaming changes everything. By 2006, Don't You Want Me is in Grand Theft Auto, then a Volkswagen ad, then a Netflix teen drama. Spotify playlists labeled 80s Workout and Synthwave Sunset rack up millions of plays. Royalties arrive in envelopes marked Mechanicals and Performance. Small checks, but steady. Oakey buys a second-hand Volvo. The girls upgrade their kitchens. They license Human to an U.S. insurance commercial. The fee clears the last of the 90s debt. For the first time in 2 decades, the band is in the black. They tour smarter now. Theaters instead of arenas, weekend runs instead of months on the road. The set list is 90% Dare and Crash, 10% deep cuts for the diehards. Philip Adrian Wright rejoins for visuals, LED screens instead of slides, but the spirit is the same. Between songs, Oakey tells dry stories about bailiffs and Minneapolis snow.
The crowd laughs in the right places. In 2010, they headlined the Rewind Festival to 20,000 people singing in the rain. A drone camera catches Susan wiping tears during the final chorus of Together in Electric Dreams. The clip goes viral on YouTube, 6 million views in a week. Credo, their first album of new material in 10 years, arrives in 2011. Recorded in a converted barn near Worksop, funded by gig deposits, it's lean and confident. Lead single Night People peaks at number 25, their lowest chart entry ever, but the tour sells out. Critics who ignored Secrets now call it a late career triumph. The band shrugs. They know the game. One good review equals one extra date in Germany. Recent years bring confessions. In a 2021 podcast, Oakey admits he still checks the bank balance every morning, half expecting the bailiffs. Joanne reveals she kept every boarding pass from the 1986 U.S. tour in a shoebox. Susan says she teaches music to primary school kids and plays them Being Boiled to scare them straight. They laugh about imposter syndrome, 40 years in, still waiting to be found out. A 2024 classic pop cover story digs deeper. The band has exhausted the vault. No Lost Dare sessions, no Secret Orbit mixes. Just a handful of 1984 Marauder outtakes on a dusty cassette labeled Limahl Rejects. They play a snippet on Zoom. It sounds like a B-side to a film that never existed. Live, they lean into the legacy. The 2024 Dare 3D audio reissue, mixed for Dolby Atmos, sells out its vinyl run in 48 hours. At Glastonbury's Avalon stage, they close with Don't You Want Me, while drones spell HL in the sky. Kids in bucket hats film on phones. The clip trends on TikTok with the caption, POV, Your Mom Was Cool. Oakey reads the comments on the tour bus and smiles for the first time all week. Speculation swirls. Will there be another album? Oakey says streaming killed the economics. 10 million plays earns £400 after splits. Joanne hints at a musical about their story. Susan just wants to keep touring till the knees give out. Heaven 17 joined them for a one-off Sheffield Summit in 2025. The two bands play Temptation back-to-back, voices overlapping like parallel timelines. The crowd loses it. They still live in Sheffield. Oakey walks his dog past the old Crazy Daisy site, now a vape shop. The girls coach netball on Saturdays. The Human League is no longer a chart force, but it's a living archive, a reminder that survival can outlast fame. And every time a new generation discovers those icy hooks, the echo grows a little louder.
In the end, the Human League's story isn't just about reinvention, it's about endurance. Every fracture, every fall from grace, every gamble that didn't quite pay off only deepened their sound, giving it the strange kind of soul that machines alone can't make. They didn't just ride the wave of the synth-pop era. They built it, broke it, and then learned to swim in its undertow. From those cluttered Sheffield basements to neon-lit arenas and back to dim hotel rooms where doubt whispered louder than applause, they kept going. Not because they were chasing charts, but because they couldn't stop creating, even when no one was listening. That quiet defiance might just be their greatest hit of all. So next time Don't You Want Me sneaks onto your playlist, listen closer. Behind the glossy synths and perfect hooks, you'll hear something raw, the sound of survival, of artists who refuse to fade quietly into nostalgia. And maybe, just maybe, that's why their echo still lingers. Proof that pop, like memory, never truly dies. If you loved this dive into the untold story of the Human League, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk, where forgotten fame gets a second spotlight.